Greetings, Guardians. This is Olympus Alliance. And yesterday we had our first look at Kendall, but today we finally begin exploring what this hero actually does, because the more you look at her skills, the more you realize this is not a simple mage at all. Kendall is aggressive, dangerous, and built around one of the most unique mechanics we have seen in a long time. Sacrifice. She sacrifices herself, pressures enemies constantly, and transforms her own health into destruction, and honestly Guardians, the deeper we go into these skills, the more exciting this hero becomes. So let's begin with her first skill. Lava Kiss. And immediately this skill already tells us exactly what Kendall wants to do in battle. She attacks the enemy with the lowest health, dealing magic damage instantly, and that alone already creates pressure because low health enemies are usually the most vulnerable heroes on the battlefield. Supports, mages, damage dealers barely surviving after a combo. Kendall actively hunts them down. But the real mechanic begins after that first hit, because while Kendall's own health stays above 30%, she starts dealing pure damage every single second to that target while sacrificing 10% of her own health in the process. And this is where the skill becomes extremely interesting. Because Kendall is literally converting her own survivability into pressure. She is burning herself alive to destroy the enemy faster, and that creates something very dangerous in real fights. Continuous execution pressure. This is not a single burst hit and it's over. No. Once Kendall locks onto a target, the pressure keeps going second after second after second, and the most important part is that this extra damage is pure damage. No armor. No magic defense. No normal protection against it. It simply goes through, and suddenly that low health enemy becomes trapped in a very dangerous situation because if they survive the initial magic hit, the pure damage continues eating them alive until they finally fall. And the craziest part is that the skill only ends when the target dies. That is a massive detail. Because this means Kendall commits to the kill. She doesn't poke. She doesn't lightly pressure enemies. She chooses a victim and keeps applying destruction until that enemy disappears from the battlefield, and honestly Guardians, this already feels very chaos-like. High risk, high reward, constant sacrifice, constant pressure. Exactly the kind of gameplay chaos heroes are known for. And immediately we start seeing synergy possibilities appear. Heroes like Zesha already benefit massively from sacrificed health. Aiden constantly manipulates health and sustain. Now Kendall enters this ecosystem, with a mechanic that continuously sacrifices her own health while dealing huge pressure, and suddenly you can already imagine interactions starting to form between these heroes. Because Kendall wants to stay above 30% health to keep the skill active, which means healing, sustain, protection and timing suddenly become extremely important around her. So now we are not just talking about a selfish damage dealer sitting in the backline, throwing abilities randomly. No. Kendall creates interactions inside her own team. She forces synergy. She forces management. And that opens the door to a lot of possibilities because this skill is not only about damage. It's about tempo and pressure. The enemy is forced to react. The enemy is forced to protect that low health target. The enemy is forced to try surviving the pressure while Kendall keeps sacrificing herself and pushing the fight forward. And honestly, for a first skill, this is already extremely impressive. Because right away we can see identity. We can see purpose. We can see a hero designed around aggression and sacrifice instead of passive gameplay, and that already makes Kendall feel very different from most mages we currently have in the game. And Guardians. This is only the first skill. Which means we are only getting started. And now Guardians. We move into sweet torture, and this is where Kendall starts becoming even more interesting because suddenly we are no longer talking only about sacrifice and pressure. We are talking about amplification. Massive amplification. This skill increases magical critical hit chance for Kendall and for all allies that have taken damage from their own skills or allied skills since the last activation of this effect, and immediately you can already see the direction here. Kendall is not sacrificing health randomly. Everything is connected. Everything feeds into another mechanic. Because now, sacrifice becomes power. The more your team manipulates health, sacrifices health, damages itself through abilities or allied effects, the more value Kendall starts generating for the entire team. And honestly, Guardians, this is where things become very dangerous because magical critical hit chance is not a small stat. This directly affects consistency, burst potential, and overall damage spikes for mage-based compositions. And suddenly the chaos synergy becomes even clearer. Heroes that naturally sacrifice health. Heroes that constantly interact with risky mechanics. Now start feeding Kendall's buff system automatically. Zesha immediately comes to mind again because she constantly benefits from health manipulation. Aiden also becomes extremely important because he spreads sacrifice and healing dynamics throughout the team. Even Kendall herself is activating these conditions constantly because her own first skill sacrifices her health continuously. So what we are seeing here is a hero that creates her own ecosystem. Her mechanics are feeding each other. One skill sacrifices health. Another skill rewards the sacrifice with magical critical hit chance. And suddenly your entire team starts scaling upward during the fight. And honestly, this is where Kendall starts looking less like a simple mage and more like an engine for chaos teams. Because this buff is not selfish. It affects allies too. Which means she is not only increasing her own threat level. She is empowering the entire team around her as long as they participate in these sacrifice mechanics. And that opens the door to very explosive situations. Because magical critical hits can massively increase burst damage windows. Suddenly mages become more threatening. Suddenly, skills become deadlier. Suddenly fights can completely swing from one activation. And the most interesting part is the condition behind it. Your allies need to take damage from their own or allied skills. Which means this is not a universal buff made for every composition in the game. This is specifically designed for teams that embrace sacrifice mechanics. And honestly, that is very good design. Because it gives Kendall identity. She is not trying to fit everywhere. She is trying to dominate inside the right environment. And if that environment becomes strong enough, Kendall could become a very scary support damage hybrid for chaos compositions. Because right now, we already have sacrifice mechanics in the game. But now we are starting to see direct rewards for them stacking together. And that changes things. Because the more the fight progresses, the more these interactions start building on top of each other. More sacrifice. More amplification. More magical critical hit chance. More pressure. And suddenly chaos teams start looking much more explosive than before. And Guardians. This is only the second skill. Which honestly makes me even more curious to see what comes next. Mitigation. It simply goes through. So now imagine this on fast attacking heroes. Imagine this on aggressive frontline heroes. Imagine this on heroes constantly applying pressure. Every hit suddenly becomes amplified by Kendall's passive destruction. And honestly, This creates a very unique dynamic because Kendall is effectively linking herself to another ally, and transforming their attacks into additional pressure sources. It's almost like she infects an ally with destructive energy and then feeds off every attack they make. But what makes this even more interesting is the target selection. She ignites the ally with the highest percentage of maximum health. That usually means healthier heroes. Tankier heroes. Heroes capable of surviving the sacrifice longer. And that is very important because the effect only ends once that ally drops below 40% health. So again, timing and sustain become everything. Because if you can maintain that ally healthy enough, this effect keeps going. More attacks. More pure damage. More pressure. And suddenly fights can snowball very quickly. And honestly, Guardians, this skill feels designed specifically for Chaos synergy once again. Because Aiden immediately comes to mind here. His healing and health manipulation could help maintain the burning ally alive longer. Aiden benefits from sacrifice mechanics. Even aggressive frontline heroes that constantly attack could become extremely dangerous under this effect. And this is where Kendall starts feeling less like a traditional mage and more like a battlefield amplifier. Because she is not only dealing damage directly herself, she is turning allies into extensions of her own pressure. And that changes how you look at team building around her. You are no longer just choosing heroes for their own value. You are choosing heroes based on how well they interact with Kendall's sacrifice system. Who attacks faster? Who survives longer? Who benefits from losing health? Who keeps the pressure active? And suddenly team synergy becomes extremely important. But the craziest part, this skill cannot be applied to an already burning hero. Which means there is management involved. Rotation involved. Decision making involved. And honestly, that is very good design because it prevents the mechanic from becoming completely out of control while still keeping it extremely threatening. And Guardians, at this point one thing is becoming very clear. Kendall is not built around simple damage. She is built around interconnected mechanics. Every skill feeds another skill. Every sacrifice creates value. Every risk creates pressure. And honestly, the more we read these skills, the more exciting this hero becomes. And now Guardians, we arrive at Purge by Pain. And honestly, this is the skill that truly connects everything together. Because after looking at all her previous mechanics, sacrifice, pressure, amplification, pure damage, this final skill suddenly makes the entire kit make sense. If Kendall has more than 30% health, her basic attacks consume 5% of her own health and deal pure damage. And immediately, there it is again. Sacrifice becomes offense. Every attack comes at a cost. Every attack burns part of her own health away. But in exchange, she gains pure damage on her attacks, and at this point we already know how dangerous that is because pure damage completely ignores traditional defenses. No armor. No magic defense. It simply goes directly into the target. But then, the legendary effect appears. And this is where things become absolutely insane. Her pure damage can now critically hit. And the chance depends on her magical critical hit chance. And suddenly, Sweet Torture becomes even more important than before. Because now all that magical critical hit chance she is generating for herself and her allies is directly feeding this mechanic. Now her pure damage is no longer just consistent pressure. It becomes burst pressure. massive burst pressure. And honestly, Guardians, this is where Kendall starts looking terrifying. Because pure damage is already difficult enough to deal with. But pure damage that can critically hit, that is a completely different level of threat. And again, all her skills are feeding each other perfectly. Lava Kiss sacrifices health for continuous pure damage. Sweet Torture rewards sacrifice with magical critical hit chance. Friendly Fire transforms allies into additional pure damage sources. And now Purge by Pain converts all of that into critical pure damage directly from Kendall herself. Everything connects. Everything escalates. Everything amplifies the next mechanic. And honestly, this is one of the best examples of skill synergy we have seen in a long time. Because Kendall does not feel like 4 separate abilities randomly put together. She feels like a complete design. A hero entirely built around one philosophy. Sacrifice health. Gain overwhelming pressure. And the craziest part, she constantly wants to stay above 30% health. That number keeps appearing throughout her kit. Which means stain, healing, timing, protection, all become extremely important around her. And immediately again, heroes like Aiden start sounding even more important beside her. Chaos synergy starts sounding stronger and stronger. And honestly, I cannot wait to start testing all of this in real fights because on paper, this hero looks incredibly promising. Not just as a damage dealer, but as a complete chaos engine. A hero capable of amplifying allies, creating pressure, dealing pure damage, and scaling harder and harder as fights continue. And Guardians, these skills are honestly amazing. Very well connected. Very thematic. Very dangerous. And this is only the beginning. Because in the next videos, we are going much deeper. We are going to test her properly. We are going to build her guide. Best builds. Best glyph priorities. Best artifact priorities. Best teams. Best chaos combinations. How to counter her. Everything you need to understand Kendall completely. Because this hero deserves real testing. Not random conclusions after one day. But honestly, as a chaos lover myself, I'm excited. Very excited. Because Kendall feels unique. And if these mechanics perform in real fights the way they look on paper, then Chaos might have just received something very, very dangerous. Stay tuned, stay sharp. And as always, salute and friendship.